Hey guys, before we get going, if you use trading apps, you got to check out eToro. It's a good way to gain exposure to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies while still getting your fix with the more traditional assets that you might know more about or just want more exposure to. eToro is also a social trading platform, which means it's kind of like social media and trading together. With copy trading, you can copy or just sort of adapt to the trading strategies of some of the best traders worldwide on the platform. This is not only going to give you exposure to how people are buying Bitcoin, but it's also going to show you what people are doing when they're expecting downturns or, one of those bull runs. So head over to eToro.com to get started on your 2020 portfolio today. eToro, smart crypto trading made easy. Hey all, Dave Holloway here. I'm sure you're all at home now, jonesing for some choice Bitcoin content. The price has dropped pretty significantly. A lot of people think it's a response to the news that came out of Italy. Their economy is essentially shut down, and now a lot of other governments across the world are doing a similar thing. Pretty obvious in times of such great uncertainty, people are looking to cash. And if you're paying attention to what the US is doing, you might see shockingly low, close to zero interest rates. There's plenty of questions around whether or not the Fed lowering interest rates is going to do anything. And also the long-term consequences of lower interest rates can be pretty negative. We're talking lower wages, unemployment, and of course, inflation. But on today's episode, I'm not going to actually ride on this economic news pipeline fallout. Even as hodlers' hands are getting weak and they're starting to sell Bitcoin, I think the vast majority of people who believe in this technology are starting to understand how much chaos can come when a central bank dictates monetary policy. This is the original narrative that guided some of the earliest people who worked on and developed Bitcoin after Satoshi left. One of those people was Amir Taaki. Taaki was drawn to Bitcoin by its promise of open source development. He was one of Bitcoin's first developers and perhaps one of the infamously most focused and outspoken on maintaining privacy and freedom from authority. In this episode, I've got an interview with Taaki, who after years spent with the Syrian Democratic Forces fighting the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria and helping build their somewhat new democratic society, is now contributing to multiple cryptocurrency and privacy projects not yet revealed to the public. Some people say the Amir Taaki of 2014, the creator of Dark Wallet and the one who first initiated the proposal for the BIP system, is completely different from the Amir Taaki of today. Taaki is an outspoken critic of many people in the Bitcoin ecosystem, as well as its overall direction. So I'll let you be the judge on some of the stuff he's saying. And I would encourage you, even if you fundamentally disagree with some of the things Taaki says, listen to the entire interview. There's plenty of insight to be gleaned from Taki's perspective. And there's a slight echo on my side of the recording. Apologies for that. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and hold on. This ride's only going to get more interesting. Here's my interview with Amir Taaki. Amir, you were one of the first Bitcoin developers. You created the Bitcoin software library, LeBitcoin, as well as Dark Wallet, the first privacy-focused Bitcoin wallet to include a built-in CoinJoin mixer. But your team also came up with what later became the .onion market open bazaar. And this is all to say you've experienced Bitcoin's early development and were a major influence to that development. Those are the same years when some of our listeners wouldn't consider themselves as part of the Bitcoin community. And for those people, can you sort of explain what that time was like as someone who had eyes on the Bitcoin code?
Yeah, it was a very optimistic time. There were these very hardcore but fringe communities like the libertarians and the free software people and the crypto anarchists who kind of converged, and we got this kind of mixing of these different ideologies in a very unique, that led to this very unique blend, which was kind of invigorating. That anytime you went on the forum, people were constantly talking about the evils of central banking and what we must do to overthrow the state monopoly on money. So it was very interesting time to be in. People were very ambitious. They're very driven.
You've also had a lot of strong interest in anarchy, and I was curious about sort of like how that came about when you were younger.
I think there's a lot of people that they kind of feel that there's something intuitively wrong in the world, and they're always searching in their lives. And I happened to be, when I was 16, discover about the open source movement, which for me was absolutely incredible. There are people all around the world who build this technology which play a foundational role in our infrastructure, in our internet. And I read the manifesto of Richard Stallman, in which he was calling for people to create a new free technology, and I found that awesome. Like I kind of decided at 16, I was like, I'm going to devote my life to make this dream happen, and it was something that captured my mind for the next decade. I became totally wrapped up in it, and I also got involved with technologists who are very much into politics, and went through many different political evolutions before, and really the anarchists, it's not totally a complete ideology, but it's probably the better of the bunch, in which it asks questions about the nature of society and hierarchy, and how we can create a richer, more sophisticated society.
I imagine you've probably read Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell, but I've read that book, and a lot of your life experiences sort of I feel like are echoed in that book. I don't know if it means anything to you. The book.
that book came to me at a real low point when I was in the front line in Syria. I was like,
wow.
What the fuck am I doing here? This is absolute disaster, really poorly disorganized. And I kind of read that book, and I was like, okay, all of this is pretty normal for any kind of revolution. Everything you describe in that book, it pretty much matched my experience in 2015.
That's pretty amazing timing.
Yeah. George Orwell, he was a remarkable guy. He was, and I really like what he said about writing, which is if you're not able to communicate an idea simply and directly to people, then you don't really understand the idea yourself. And I think we can take a lot from that, not just as writers, but in terms of technology, like the technology in general. If we can't build simple to use or simple to understand, and I'm not just talking about products or apps, but I'm talking about the actual pieces of the technology that we use to build technology ecosystems in general. If you can't build those components to be simple, to be elegantly architectured, then maybe we don't actually understand the thing that we're building itself. And there's something to be said for simplicity and minimalism as a design philosophy.
Yeah, I've seen this sort of take shape in CoinFloor, the UK cryptocurrency exchange. They've recently sort of relaunched their services to only focus on Bitcoin, and especially reduce sort of day trading, speculative kind of buys. So I've definitely seen a shift towards simplifying, making things easier, at least for users in the Bitcoin community. And I'm curious, this is a big question, and I kind of want to ask it, get your answer, and obviously we'll keep coming back to it. But how has the Bitcoin from your original, I want to say 2014 days, to the present, how have you seen that community change?
The early Bitcoin was like really driven and focused, and having focus is important because focus is what enables you to execute and to deliver. And what we've seen happen since then is that, those simplistic ideologies which kind of converged around Bitcoin haven't really been able to answer all of the questions and kind of guide us in terms of strategy to kind of go forwards and to take opportunity and to be successful. And so what's happened is we've seen a kind of diversification from these ideologies. And, one branch of that is the people who left and made Ethereum, and, they're into unicorns and rainbows and really vague, abstract projects that I don't know. And then we've got this weird kind of regressive or reactionary Bitcoin culture, which is kind of reasserting that, we're not hippies, we're not vegans, we eat meat, and very opposed to any kind of change or progress or development or advancement. And reality is that, social matters are complex and hard, and, we require some level of sophistication and strategy and development of thoughts, to really be able to use this thing, to be able to make something of this thing. So what I would say is that the difference is that today, people are a bit lost, and that's why you see all these silly lifestyle focuses, or silly because as human beings, we come into existence, and then we're like, okay, we're here, and then it's like, okay, I need something, I need to occupy myself with something, some kind of life goal that make me feel significant or purposeful or meaningful. And that's the whole point about having a role or having some kind of place, that you feel that you're not just a nothing, you're actually valuable. And people are always searching for these things, and people try to find random things to preoccupy themselves with. And the thing is that the society that we live in, we know that it's a fake society, that the reality of what we're being told on the TV versus the reality of what's happening around us, is very different. And it's kind of like in the Soviet Union, where people could see all around them that the economy was collapsing, and they knew what they were being told on the TV was not real, but they couldn't imagine any other reality that they were living in. So they kind of continued their existence, kind of continued doing things the way they were doing it. And so we're in this very strange place inside of crypto culture, where we're facing significant challenges to the technology, to the power of it being co-opted by external actors, by actors that don't necessarily have our philosophical vision or goal in mind, and maybe I'm talking about people like Consensus, or maybe I'm talking about central bank digital currencies, or it could have been Facebook, but I don't think Libra currency is going to succeed now. But the only way that we're going to challenge these things is by having a coherent analysis, system of organization, some kind of narrative that kind of set out a path forwards, and that we know what the projects that we are to have to work on, so that we can develop something that's coordinated. And I've seen this happen repeatedly in many projects and many movements over my life. The best example of that is the free software movement, that We worked on free software in my early 20s. I was completely devoted to free software, and it was tough. It was really difficult. And the problem is that as a movement, we didn't organize strategically. We didn't think about how we can construct something that, that people could work inside that system, and we can like together deliver something bigger. It was too dispersed. And you had this problem where there would be like a huge amount of focus on some random projects, or you'd get like a technologist who, he'd spend years working on something, which, maybe in the grand scheme of things wasn't so important for us as a movement to get from A to B. And then you had like these other projects which were like really key, but didn't get enough attention or enough focus. And, part of that is about the system, how we like, as either like an organization or a federation of organizations or whatever, like how we allocate resources, and like how people are supported to work on projects. But the bigger emphasis that I want to draw attention to, which a lot of people always, when I talk about this, they focus on the kind of system underlying it, but that's not really the center of this. In some ways, like the system of organization is kind of whatever. It's like you can either have it or not have it, but the real focus that's important is the narrative, is the kind of ideas that we develop, that we kind of analyze, we kind of like have a roadmap. We like go because, okay, look, if I explain, when I build a product, I can write a really shitty code, and I can like get it out there, boof, it's out, and I have something that's out, and then it's like for that thing to grow, I need to like bring on more developers, and I need to bring on more resources so that it can expand. But as it expands, it's because there was no roadmap, because there was no pre-planning beforehand, it kind of become an unmanageable mess. And then maybe as a movement, in terms of our trajectory, not just in terms of like a single product, but a range of products, like we have to think about the core technology. Okay, how do we build the core technology in some way that it's able to hit all of these targets along the way? And the problem is that kind of thought is not being done inside of cryptocurrency. And when it is being kind of touched upon, it's like really vague and it's not concrete. So we have to kind of develop that dimension to our kind of movement. But the problem is that there is not a kind of interest in this kind of like higher level of development, because a lot of the focus is like very short-term focused, and maybe influenced by like American startup culture, which is exactly what I said, like get a whole bunch of people together, do a raise, start moving, pushing things out, hire more people, grow, expand, do another raise, as opposed to, okay, let's design our software architecture, let's like plan our infrastructure, let's develop our libraries, so that we can start to develop products, and not just any products, but products with a focus. How did we decide what that focus is? Because as a cryptocurrency, or as this emerging field of technology, like really, if we're really honest, like the goal of the technology is because we want power. Like we have some ideas about the world, and we want our ideas to gain power. We want to put this technology as a powerful tool in service of those ideas. So, it's not, and like some people is like, oh, I want to make loads of money, and that's really like a simpler, lower level way for people who kind of want to gain power, and they don't really know why they want to gain power. But yeah, we have to kind of we have to realize that this older ideologies, or like mixed bag of concepts that we had before, they were great in the early days of Bitcoin. They've kind of like they were really, they gave drive and ambition to the project, and they are our roots. and we have to get back to our roots. But we also have to realize that, that is not the thing by itself. Like, we have to kind of develop or expand our ideas. We have to expand our vision, and that's why I'm trying to talk about narrative and talk about culture, because it's really important to think about the paradigms or the concepts that drive programmers, because or your technologists or your movement as a whole, because this is the thing that the free software movement suffered for. Free software movement had like a very big vision of society, and it ended up, because it wasn't able to properly organize itself, it wasn't able to properly develop as a movement, it kind of became stunted. And what happened was it got captured by open source movement, by a bunch of business guys. And then if you talk to people today, some developers, open source developers, will say, Linux was a success, Linux was great, free software was great. But in reality, free software movement kind of were, like developing free software. We were developing Linux, all of these tools. And, now, who are the entities that dominate open source on a large scale, on an infrastructure scale? Well, it's all the big corporations. So, we basically developed technology to make a bunch of corporations rich. So I don't define that as a success, like a successful movement, and, there's a bunch of random GitHub repos with like small projects, small fragments, but we don't have like a decent open source video editor. We don't have, it's like these large projects which require coordination and teams of people like working together. Is kind of the thing that we lost. And that is like part of the whole idea of Unix philosophy. Like, we have these concepts mapped out. Like, how do we build large technology at scale, but like guided by some kind of like goal or dream, or as a community. This is all of the work of the people working on technology in the Unix philosophy, the hacker movement, the early free software movement. We have to kind of take that culture and revive it and put it in service of cryptography. And cryptography is really interesting because, there was a lot of these concepts in academia since the 70s, since the 90s, since the 2000s. And they've just been kind of there, siloed in different kind of areas. And now, for the first time, like, people are like taking these ideas and they're trying to put them together in like new ways that nobody really envisioned before, and coming out with like code that we can like use, or like interesting products, which, it doesn't necessarily always work, but it's kind of like very interesting time, like, and these new peer-to-peer network technologies and cryptography, so we can use to build products, and we can use these products to build an ecosystem, and we can use this to create markets that are outside of the control of the state, where the state has like no power over these markets, that give different communities or different organizations or groups of people who don't have a voice, where they can operate in these kind of spheres that we create. And that's a very powerful tool that we can put in service of this future.
Yeah, you seem like you have a strong understanding of the power of cultural movement, and I think narrative is a part of that, and I want to get into that. But just thinking about those early days, and sort of like how you communicate with an open source community, you're also known for creating the BIP system to create a wider dissemination of information about things being proposed for Bitcoin. Can you tell me about why and how you created the BIP system?
Yeah, so in the early days of Bitcoin, after Satoshi left, he kind of split the project in three parts and he gave each person a different part. And Gavin got commit access to the repo, and Sirius got access to the website. And there were five of us on this Bitcoin.org website, which was like Gavin, Neil Schneider, Sipa, me, and Sirius. But after my first talk in Amsterdam about Bitcoin, Gavin Andreessen, he like messaged me and he said, "Look, I didn't really like the way you were talking, and I think you should stop talking about Bitcoin publicly." And I was basically like, I was like, "Dude, fuck off! Like, you can't tell me what to do."
What were you talking about?
I talked to an audience of bankers. It was the EPCA conference. And I said, "Look, this is a radical technology. You guys can't stop it. Like, we're here and this is what we're going to do to you." Gavin didn't want that. Gavin wanted to work with the regulators. He wanted to work with the financial institutions. He wanted to onboard the big money into Bitcoin. He wanted to become legit. And I said, I was the opposite side of that ideological pole. So Gavin started to put up roadblocks for me to participate in the project. Him and his clique of people, which he started to sideline me from Bitcoin. And every time I tried to make a commit, or I tried to contribute code to the Bitcoin Core project, it was blocked. So I was like, okay, it's impossible for me to work with these people. So that's why I started working on libBitcoin, and I started to rewrite Bitcoin source code to have alternative implementation, because I thought it was very dangerous to have a single implementation which was in the hands of Gavin. He needed some kind of counterbalance. And then the BIP system as well was like, Gavin, he's not smart. He doesn't have he's not a very good developer. And he had these crazy ideas that he wanted to modify Bitcoin with. So I was like, okay, there have to be some control to limit his power. And that's why I proposed the BIP system, so that there's a standardization process, so that it has to go through public review. So these guys couldn't just make changes to the Bitcoin system as they saw fit. It was to kind of stop or limit changes to Bitcoin. The problem is that culture that we initiated in those days was kind of like completely overtaken the mind space of Bitcoin. It's like completely gone towards its trajectory, and that was not the intent originally. The intent was to have Bitcoin be conservative against changes, but it wasn't to stop any kind of progress happening inside of Bitcoin, which, Bitcoin as a system, it's very poorly engineered, it's very inefficient, and the kind of developments in cryptography that are happening now are going to lead to a system that's eventually going to supersede Bitcoin at some point. It's kind of like inevitable at this point.
Are you speaking purely from a privacy standpoint, or are you talking about just a cryptocurrency in general?
Cryptocurrency. Look at this. There is now all this talk about stateless blockchains or RSA accumulators, or with zero knowledge proofs. That eventually we're going to have a cryptocurrency where you can run a full node on your mobile phone, and it's perfectly anonymous, and the supply is auditable. It's like, what does Bitcoin offer over that system, which is like
it's got it has the first mover advantage that I think a lot of people tout. Do you believe in that? Do you think that something like that could be implemented on Bitcoin?
It could be implemented on Bitcoin, but it's taken how many years to implement Schnorr signatures, and that's ridiculous. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous, and the code is a mess. The development team is not doing a good job. It's and Blockstream is a failure as a company, so there isn't really a strong narrative that give like drive to Bitcoin projects. So it's like I'm not, unless there's like some great change, I'm not too optimistic. And these people that sit at the top of the project, they're too corrupted by the power that they have. Their interests are too entrenched by continuing or furthering what exists. They're not, first of all, I don't think that they're capable of enacting the kind of radical kind of shift in directives that Bitcoin need as a project to be able to face up to the challenges that we're facing as a community from other entities that are adopting the technology that we have produced or we are producing. And second of all, I just don't think that it's in their interest to. I just don't think that they are motivated by the same socio-political dimension that a lot of us are driven by. I think honestly that they have found a position, they found somewhere which is kind of comfortable, and they kind of enjoy that kind of community. They found that meaning or purpose that give them kind of value as a human being, and they want to hold on to that position. So I've had experience like interacting with these guys, and I was really disappointed in how limited their vision and their scope is for Bitcoin, and how unwilling they are to kind of engage with these ideas on a high level. And maybe you think, okay, Ethereum is like more optimistic. There's more hope in Ethereum, but it's like Ethereum also. It's like too corrupted. It's like not able to organize itself effectively and deliver. It's like too wishy-washy. Yeah, but I will say that Ethereum community, like the actual community, not the leadership, the community has a very rich resource of talent and forward-thinking people that's like really worth engaging with or recruiting from. And it's kind of a mistake when Bitcoin tried to cut itself off from other cryptocurrency communities and present itself as above or superior, because really that's not who the main enemy is. That's not like where we draw the line at. Like really, and that's what I mean about this shift in focus. It's become a kind of lifestyle or a kind of identity politics where it's like, I'm a Bitcoiner, I'm a Ethereum person, I'm this, I'm that. It doesn't really matter. Like nobody really cares. At the end of the day, it's cryptocurrency, it's cryptography, it's an entity in itself now that's beyond any one of these singular projects. The really big question is one of economics, of the state, of the system, of central banks, of financial networks. It's like that's what we should be engaged in. But it's a lot of like really silly diversions at this point.
Yeah, I feel like, well, to one of your earlier points about the American startup community, I'll acknowledge that I'm very much a part of that. And the conversations around mainstream adoption right now are very much sort of what you're speaking against or warning. I see a lot of the identity politics around Bitcoin, people, saying they're Bitcoiners on Twitter as sort of a way to simplify the narrative, and people who are working on different projects as somehow taking away from that narrative. Like, how would you sort of explain what you're saying from that context?
Well, it's like, I don't really see Bitcoin people that much talking about their narrative. In fact, I don't even think they have a narrative anymore. I think there's just a vestige of something that existed before a long time ago, which is like people just paying homage to ideas that kind of get you into the community, get you accepted. It's like, yeah, I'm against central banks. Cool, you're a libertarian, you're one of us. But it's really doesn't go beyond that, and you're not going to get far if the conversation is not elevated to a higher level. But I'm not against American startup culture in the same way that I'm not totally for like like a world full of academic philosophers. It's I like this the thing about making a startup and how you structure a project and how you like put categories of people as founders, as staff, as investor, how you make a timeline, a budget, allocate resources. This is all really useful knowledge about how to execute and how to get something done and like how to make things happen. And I'm totally for that. And that's knowledge that was kind of missing from the free software culture, which is what existed in the beginning. But also the problem is that free software, it had the philosophy, it had the beating heart that drove the project forward. Like those people that they really believe in something, and because they really believe in something, they devote their mind completely to a thing. They even willing to forego profit. They're like not just doing it 9 to 5, but they're like really in the thing. Those people are like very special, and those people are like what really carry your project forwards. It's the people that is not so valuable is not the paid employees. It's not the really expensive cryptographer or the really rock star dev that you're like paying a huge salary to. And it's important not to lose the focus, because when we lose the focus, that's when we start to get co-opted, that we no longer like realize like, okay, where is the actual core of our movement lie? And that's kind of what's happening now, is because everybody's so focused on doing something or getting something out the door, but it's not really like nobody's stopping to think, okay, like where are we going towards, or like for what are we doing this? And so you get like one project, and you mentioned Open Bazaar before. Open Bazaar, everybody gets really excited about it. It doesn't deliver, it doesn't work out, it doesn't deliver to people's expectations about like what will be the effects of it. Then people like lose hope in that project. Then something new comes along, people invest all their interest in that, everybody start pushing that thing also doesn't work out. Something new come along, people go into that thing. It happens over and over and over again until people start to get exhausted, people start to lose hope. And that's like a process that it just repeats itself over and over and over again. I've seen it happen throughout all open source projects and the entire movement as a whole. What I'm saying is like, before we start pushing into the next big projects to like move forwards quickly, let's like slow down a bit. Let's like really think about like, where are we going towards? Like, why are we doing this? Like, let's start to like look geographically. What are the key regions that are going to be popping up in the future? It's like when I was in Syria, I was like, I was also in Syria this last year as well, and my like main role or responsibility is like reviewing technical projects for North Syria, for a region of 5 million people, so that we can get technical projects approved. And one of the projects was about telephony and internet, and people often ask me, oh yeah, what about like mesh networks and all this stuff? It's like, look, you can't deliver like a quality production scale networking system to people with mesh networks. It just doesn't work. Like you need to have some kind of like structural planning of backbones of like architecture for how you lay the pipes in the ground. And I was looking at open source solutions, like how can I build like mobile phone networks and stuff like that. And there's like a few things on the internet. There's like a few like rando projects, like Open BTS, but it's not something you can deploy like to like on a national scale. And in the end, it's like we literally just had to cut a deal with a private company to come and like lay the fiber down, to come and create the telephony networks, which is not great because it's like, now you like give a private entity control over your telecommunications infrastructure, and you don't know what hostile powers exist outside, what kind of surveillance infrastructure they install inside your telephony, which is a shame. It's like a good example of like how open source has failed to deliver. And then I was like looking at cryptocurrency. I was like, okay, how can we deploy cryptocurrency? And I started to contact like people from cryptocurrency community, and I was like, a lot of these like so-called leaders, I just saw that they're like very limited in their thinking. They're not able to think on a bigger scale. And I was like, okay, I'm not getting any support from any of these people. And, all the people on inside of Bitcoin that every year do rounds in conferences, giving lectures. So then I was like, okay, how do we do this ourselves? And then I started to look, and it's like, okay, you need to have, for people who don't have mobile phones or connectivity, how do you create physical currency? Like, what are the machines you need? Like, what are the solutions that are out there? What's the research that's been done? How do we create a radio network with base stations? Like, how do you like create the servers? How do you link all that up? Like, how about the software so that you can like issue blinded credentials, or like blinded tokens that you can have like anonymous instant payments and have metadata in those transactions, and all of this stuff like is like, if you are making an infrastructure for 5 million people, it's completely different to if you're making it for individual, for like an individual making an app in an app store in a marketplace. And it's like, we're just not prepared. Like, if any administration says to us in the world, okay, I want to deploy Bitcoin in our region of like however many people, there's no group now that has the software or the infrastructure ready to go and like set up that financial network. And really, that is the key important topic that we should be engaged in. It's like, now I read about Russia creating an alternative to SWIFT network because of the embargo, and they're signing up Iran and China to that network. But there's many other jurisdictions around the world that like we need to be creating infrastructure, and we need to like be connecting them to our financial network so they can issue financial instruments, so they can extend lines of credit to other jurisdictions. So that, for example, if in Hong Kong there's a guy who has Bitcoin, he can like extend a line of credit to Syria, and he can cash out to a local pool of dollars. Or the people in Syria who have assets like oil can issue futures or other finance instruments on that asset, so that they can get investment to build their infrastructure. Or, just things like this is a real great application of this technology, but we're just not thinking on that level. It's just very limited understanding of like money and economics and the global geopolitical situation in general. And like people always like try to meme into existence things like Venezuela or Cyprus or Greece or Iran or any of these financial crises. But the simple fact is these were opportunities. They came, we were not prepared. There was nobody there to like make use of them, and they went. And that was a lost opportunity in the market. It's like sad. That's a failure as a community. And it's like, that's like really like the opportunities, the key opportunities that we should be facing. We should be engaged in our market so we develop better technology, but we're not. This is a bunch of technologists playing around with blockchain technology. Some of the things that I see people in Ethereum or in Bitcoin or any of these projects talking about, I'm like, this is insane. This has like no practical basis in reality. But there is like a brighter flip side to it, which is there is a lot of very interesting research that's happening, very interesting developments inside of cryptocurrency, which is mainly in the finance layer, in like financial products that people are developing, not in the technology level so much. Like in technology level, the stuff with zero knowledge proofs is really interesting. But the applications of the technology is very lacking. I saw the speech of Vitalik in Shanghai, and he was talking a lot about different techniques and different mechanisms and going, oh, this thing is interesting, this other thing is interesting. But really, it was like something was lacking, and the thing that was lacking was like, how does this all fit together? What's like the structure or the infrastructure that you want to create from all these little tiny pieces? You can't make like a project out of just like random bits and bobs that you put together. You need to have a singular vision, and that vision is like what enable there to be focus, and with focus, what enable things to be executed and delivered. And it's not just that we're talking about like there need to be a boss. Like a boss is like a really silly like corruption of this concept or idea, which is that there's a guy who wake up one day as a boss and he says, oh, John, I need you to do this. Ben, you need to do this. You need to do this. You need to do this. You guy, you need to do this. Creative people don't work like that. Like for me, if I need to like deliver something, there's like months where I'm like studying, like where my mind start to move towards that thing, like I start to reduce my other responsibilities, and I start to like move my creative energies towards like kind of trying to manifest this thing or like deliver this thing. And it's the same with like any programmer or any creative field. The real job of a good CEO, I'm talking about like good CEOs, is the narrative. It's like this. It's like every day coming in and saying, okay, look, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing the thing. And, like inspire the people around them, that give them like direction towards somewhere. And that's like kind of what we're like severely lacking inside of cryptocurrency. And people are like so relaxed about it. They're like totally YOLO about it. Like, oh yeah, we're going to win, blah, blah. It's inevitable. Okay. Like maybe, the price will go up, but it's like, will we really, deliver on something like, or will you really like deliver that expectation, of that thing that is that real promise for like why we're into this thing, or will it be some other entities that eventually that come along and create the cryptocurrency that most of the people use, like I don't think people realize how big of a threat Facebook Libra was. Luckily, the Congress was just like, no, stop. Sorry, that was also the other point that I was making, which is not enough just to have the code out there, that people are using it and running it. There's like all this other dimension of like the community, like who's making this technology. So, like when I say to people, I was like, okay, Linux is a failure. Like nobody uses Linux. Like everybody's using Mac computers. They go, oh no, everybody uses Android phones. Like, what kind of success is that? Like we spent all of our energy and life to develop a free software product to make Google rich, to make some other corporations rich. Like and we didn't deliver free technology. Like we actually, if anything, like technology is like being used to construct systems of mass surveillance and like mass control. And it's like, great, they're using open source software to do it. It's like, we need to like really shift our mindset, like to have a more sophisticated understanding of technology and like really deepen our perspective, and like go, okay, like, strategically, like what are we doing as a community? Where are we putting our energies? Because it's kind of ridiculous in Linux. Like we had like 20 desktops and they were all really shitty. And like everybody was like putting their energy, there was like all these splits and forks because everybody was like, oh, mine's like slightly better because it has like the button over here, or that you have this menu over here. It was like, it got really silly, and there was so many, and I'm not saying there shouldn't ever be forks, but there was also a lot of wasted energy because, because Richard Stallman, he came along and he said like, okay, this is what we want to do. We want to build an operating system that's free, and this is how it should work, and these are the tools we need to make, and this is what I've done, and this is what we're doing. And everybody was like, yeah, let's make it happen. And they started to put their energy and like make the thing, and it manifested. But then after that, graphical desktops started to arrive, and Richard Stallman took a step back, and nobody really stepped up, and the community just started to fragment and get dispersed and became a bit lost. And that's where we find ourselves today. Linux didn't, and then Mac came out of nowhere and became like the desktop that a lot of people are using, which is tragedy. And it's like the same thing will happen to cryptocurrency unless we get our act together, unless we learn from history. Like there's a whole wealth of knowledge in like history of technology or history in general, and we're not like pulling from that resource.
So it sounds like you also have spent some time looking into how Bitcoin can be deployed to use for other dissident technological applications. And I was curious if you could go into that more, just how can Bitcoin be used through dissident technology, or how do you see Bitcoin as a tool for transactions without third-party interference?
What's really interesting is that now in Asia, there is a huge amount of wealth that's like moving around in markets between, and it's like wealth that's like outside of the prevailing financial order. It's moving through these markets. It's black or grey money, and the people that have this money, they're like using different laws from different jurisdictions, to kind of like hide their wealth, to kind of move it around, like different former British financial colony safe havens. But now it's kind of changing, and the states are saying to these offshores, like, you need to limit the activity of these people, and they're starting to open tax audits, and they're starting to put pressure. And so the people with that wealth, they have to become more smart about how they use their money, bribing central banks, or like moving like physical assets across borders with like militias, or like setting up financial networks for third world countries. All of that is a big body of wealth, which is opposed to the prevailing financial order, and is like putting its money in areas of activity that were previously blocked or shut off from the existing order. So that's what I was talking about, like when I talk about like economy, which is like people imagine money, which like money. What is money? Money is like a unit of account. It's like, okay, I have some good here, I have another good. It's like, okay, we like pretend that these goods have value, and we make like a kind of spreadsheet where it's like, okay, this good have this value, this good have this value, this good, and that's like the system of the market and like price discovery. And there's like a money which is like issued by a central bank, or like, I don't know, gold or whatever. But a lot of people like imagine like money as like some neutral instrument, like a dollar. But a dollar is not really a dollar. A dollar is like if I for example have a Swiss bank account, I can get and to get that bank account, maybe I need Swiss residency, and I have to pay like a huge amount of money in taxes, and I have to like get fucked to be like part of their secret club, their special club, because I'm an outsider. But I'm part of the club, so now other people with Swiss bank accounts, legit people with money in Switzerland can invest money into my bank account. They can invest money into my project or my company, but if I've got a Seychelles bank account, they're not going to send money to a Seychelles bank account. Likewise, if I have money in a Seychelles bank account, I can't send my dollars to them. So it's like really what we should be talking about is financial networks and the utility of the credit that you have inside of these financial networks, the things that it can do, that it can enable to happen. And that's what's interesting about cryptocurrency, is like we can use this technology to create financial networks which enable different economic localities, different activity that before was not enabled by the technology. That's why it's interesting. And that's why I always talk about money laundering and drug dealing and terrorist groups, because like really that is like the super political edge of, you know, changes, like stuff that is downright illegal, that's like completely illegal, like terrorist organizations. And you know, they like ISIS has been raising money with cryptocurrencies. They can send any amount of money anywhere in the world to fund their groups or their activities. That's a very big deal. I don't think people realize like how much of an enabler that technology is. And people go, oh yeah, dollars, blah. Do you realize how difficult dollars are to move across borders? This technology is like the ability to like transmit currency instantly anywhere in the world, any amount, is a big deal. It's like this is like a really big transformation in finance and in technology as well, because of the things that enable people to create. Like now, if there's like some financial instrument that you want to create, with cryptography, you can create it. You know, like I remember in the beginning of Bitcoin, it was like kind of edgy to say, oh yeah, I'm making a Ponzi scheme. Yeah, who wants to invest? And everybody would be like, yeah, Ponzi schemes, woo. Like now today, people do bonded curves. You know, it's basically a Ponzi scheme to like do fundraising of projects, but it's like very interesting exploration into like new mechanisms, like funding mechanisms. You know, so this is like kind of a renaissance that we're like facing in like cryptography and technology and finance, and you know, like maybe like a kind of renaissance is overdue. But you know, also I talked about terrorist groups, but you know, for example, you know, like North Syria or Rojava, like the ability, you know, like for example, they're an upstart political entity which is like surrounded by hostile powers, and even though, like for example, America and Russia or Turkey and Russia are enemies, or like, you know, they're like opposed to each other, they also have a lot of like military and economic agreements on many levels together. They work together on many levels. Like the stuff you see in the media where they're opposed to each other is like one thing, and yes, that there is like clashes of interests, like opposed interests, like, you know, maybe one guy support the rebels and another guy support Assad, which is like the Russians. But you know, they also work together in many other ways. Like they have many other interests. And in the case of North Syria, you know, like they're in a very difficult situation where basically everybody is hostile to them, and there's a prevailing financial order, which is like, you know, like if you want to be able to, I don't know, gain some, be able to purchase some kind of parts on the open market. First of all, you're blocked from the open market. They, you know, like they say, okay, you're not allowed, even with your own money, to have access to the market. So then, like maybe they send representatives around the world, you know, like to open shell companies and, you know, start talking with other companies. It could be like an agricultural part. It could be something like really silly or stupid, you know, or something that's like necessary. And, you know, start to talk with a company, and the company's like, yeah, I'll agree to sell you this thing. So then it's like, okay, how do we get the money to them? You know, how do you get the money to that company? So the ability to like transmit cryptocurrency, like from one place to another, is like a big deal. You know, it's like enable that new political entity to kind of support itself. And that's why also the liquidity of these pools of capital is really important. That's why I'm talking about financial networks, because like we haven't really been kind of focused on building out the technology or the infrastructure to enable these financial networks, and we haven't been engaged in the places that actually need these financial networks, And so because we haven't been engaged, we haven't got the feedback, and that feedback hasn't enabled us to think about how we need to improve the technology so we can go forwards.
So you traveled to Syria after your time as a Bitcoin developer, and you served in the army for about a year, and then spent the next 2 years working on development projects. And correct me if any of this is wrong, but I was curious, what was it like to go from being an open source software developer to becoming getting more involved in the political development of a revolution?
Yeah, so it was kind of mad. Like, I got shipped to a war. I had to learn how to use a gun and everything. And I was like on the car, and the guy was like, and I was like, there was like a guy there, and he was like showing me how to use the Kalashnikov, and I was like, what the fuck, man? Like, and I got to the front line, and there was some dude, and he was saying to me, don't worry, if you'll learn if you're not dead in 2 weeks, you'll know everything there is to know about fighting in a war. And it was so shifty. But yeah, I managed to get out of that situation after a few months, which, you know, it was a mad time. It was chaos, you know, like literally they were just shipping everyone off to the front line. Things now are a lot different than back then. A lot of things have changed. It was like 2015. It was like really a mad time. But, you know, it was a very good experience because, you know, you have to understand that there is, you know, this movement in Syria, which is based around the ideas of Öcalan, the philosophy of Öcalan, which he wrote these books in prison. But it's a very organized movement, and you know they were able to capitalize on a very chaotic situation, which, if you look now, everybody else in Syria, you know, is gone, is finished. Like all the rebels and ISIS, and nobody else was able to survive except the Kurdish people in the north, because they were on it, and they were able to, like, when things happen, they were able to anticipate them. They were able to move. They were well organized. They were like disciplined, and also sophisticated. Like also with the thought and reasoning, you know. Because like you have to organize like a society from scratch, like in the middle of a war. You have to set up a legal system, you have to set up education, you have to set up health, you have to set up hospitals, you have to set up media, economy, agriculture, industry, your military, everything. It's like intense. And so like being in the middle of that, like seeing like an entire new political system form, like you really get an understanding of like what are the troubles that you have to deal with, like what are the difficulties you have to deal with. For example, the way that they handle security. So, you know, there's this like idea that they want to create an autonomous, democratic, free society. And so the security, which is done in the city, is done by local neighborhood militias, which those militias like answer to neighborhood assemblies. So it's the local people who are responsible for the security and policing of their area. And then there is like a professional police, which like handle checkpoints and like key areas of security. But like you kind of understand, like, for example, you know, if my neighbor is like, if there's like a guy down the road who's like an ISIS guy and he needs to be like arrested, I'm not going to go to his house and fuck with that guy. You know, like personally, I'm not going to go to his house. But, you know, that's why you need like guys who are like dressed in black, who are like anti-terror police, who are like specialized for this thing, who are going to go and arrest that guy, take that guy in, and who have experience doing that. And then, but the problem is like, okay, we recognize that when you have these people dressed in black, whose job is security, that also it's a threat to our liberty. So that's why you need civil society militias. That's why you need some kind of counterbalance to that. And so, that's what's very interesting about their political system, is like how they try to resolve these questions of power and disparity, but also the practical realities of implementing a system, like a political entity that can survive when you're surrounded by hostile powers on every side. And why is liberty important? Because that's what is the source of the wealth and creation and development of society. But at the same time, you need to answer questions like foreign policy and security and matters of national importance. We're seeing this virus now that's spreading around, and really it's there need to be some coordination on high levels, health coordination, because this thing is lethal. It's not good. But then also, when you have militias that are responsible for manning checkpoints or doing local security in a local neighborhood, maybe they're not so professional in how they handle things sometimes. A policeman is trained to handle many situations, and I saw that happen myself. People are not prepared, who are amateur in dealing with security issues. So that kind of thing, seeing it firsthand was okay, it gave me an understanding about how do political structures work, how do people navigate political structures, and how do you coordinate at scale? Because you have to imagine that a country of 5 million people, the level of organization that you need to have to coordinate all of that thing is it's immense. You can't just be a group of funny activists who are having funny parties and doing random things. You really need to be serious, and you need to be focused, and you need to have a direction. And that's what I mean about cryptocurrency right now. It's a bunch of kids who they have too much money, and they don't really work that hard. A lot of people is very unfocused in and wasting their time, and it's not and also the leadership is ineffective, it's incompetent, and it's not giving a good example to people.
That experience you had where you saw a very a society under really intense external threats, fascism, if we're thinking about the Islamic State. What do you think the Bitcoin community could learn from that, from the group? I mean, I guess sort of autonomous Kurdistan at this point.
I think people can learn a lot. The biggest advice I'd give someone is don't read about Rojava, but actually read the books of Öcalan, which is Manifesto for a Democratic Civilization, parts 1 and part 2, which is honestly the best book that I read. It inspired me a lot. And it's a book that you have to kind of study, because he mentioned a lot of historical events and a lot of thinkers, and you have to kind of go off and study those people. Also interesting is the article by Adam Curtis on Rojava. If you search Adam Curtis Rojava, that's a very interesting article. And Adam Curtis also made a documentary called Hypernormalization, which talk about politics and technology and Trump and Putin and ISIS and all of these things. Very interesting documentary. So on that level, I think what that can contribute to people is giving them a wider perspective of political systems, political philosophy, economics and sociology, which enable them to more effectively direct their focus and their energy. But then the second point is now we need to organize, and we need to organize to be able to spread our ideas and to be able to support the people in our community, to be able to work on projects that are valuable, to find the resources to support people. And we need to create a structure, and also we need to educate people. And that means, and that's what we're essentially, I've been trying to do for the last few years, which has been difficult because I haven't got any support. So I've had to kind of try to gather resources, but we need to start to come up with a proper structure, and not just like a structure which is engaged on like doing things and like paying salaries to people, but also having a space inside of that which can support people with potential, enhance or develop our human resource, which every time I go to any of these blockchain crypto conferences, there is like a huge amount of young people that they're really ambitious, they're very creative, they realize that like this thing is going to be big in the future and they want in, and they're like, and they're very smart, and it's like a valuable human resource that at the moment it just end up like doing slave work for random companies or silly things. And what we need to do is we need to create a base which can bring these people in and educate them and give them orientation and direction, because that's our future. Our future is not the really expensive people that we give salaries to now, which maybe if you're making a business, you need to do that so you can deliver a product. But we also need to be investing in our future, and that means like the education of the next phase of our movement. And there's very little attention that's given to that, or and everybody's like kind of got this mentality of like, okay, well, what's in it for me? Like, what do I get out of this? When it's like, it's like it's such an important directive for us as a whole, yet the amount of investment that it requires is comparatively very small compared to some of these really silly projects that we know everybody knows is not going to go anywhere. But the problem is like everything have to be phrased in terms of a short-term investment, which is like kind of a tragedy, because if we can't together as a community pool our resources to invest in strategic areas that are good for us as a whole, then we are going to get dominated by other groups who can and do have the capacity to do that, which is either states or global corporations.
And like at the root of this conversation is what you're saying about the need for a strong narrative. And first, I'm just curious from your personal experience, given that you've probably evolved to have a much more complex narrative about your life and sort of what you believe in now. But when you were a kid, what kind of narratives moved you?
The open source one was like really big, and I thought that was the most amazing thing in the world, that people all around the world were building technology, and they weren't building it for profit, but they were building it because they believed in open source. And I always said to myself, like, why is nobody talking about this? Why is this not like a thing that's being like talked about in Hollywood, like in the movies? It's like such a momentous like undertaking. But I was also I got really involved in like anarchist, activist communities and politics, and I was like, wow, this is like very different. People are like living together, and there's like mutuality, and there's like shared sense of values, and it's nice because because like you can be around people who like share your ideas, and together you're like trying to create something big, and that's a very different way of living to the society that most people exist in, which is like you do your work and you have like your own atom in like a sea of atoms, and just like you can feel like just you fade out of existence. That's important, and that's something we've kind of like lost sight of, and kind of what we need to restore back to the society.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the open source movement, the best example that I've encountered in my experience, at least in the last 2 or 3 years, has been sort of the work that people do on the Tor project. I don't know if you have interacted often with the Tor community, but
yeah, I'm involved in the Tor project. Actually got taken over by SJWs, and there was all these problems with sex scandals and whatever. And it's like, I don't understand. Like, this happens all the time. Like, why people can't be professional? Like why also there's all these leftist infiltration of projects, and and yeah, it's very disappointing. But I'm involved in NIM now, which is an alternative to Tor, because we know Tor has been broken, and NYM TECH NIM Tech. We know that Tor has been broken for many years, and but with the shutdowns of all these drug markets recently, it's kind of like definitive, like there's like conclusively the authorities and agencies like have a handle on Tor. So Mixnet is an alternative proposal that's existed for many years, and now we're developing this technology, but not just developing this technology, but also interested in like the entire ecosystem of tools and libraries that we want to create to enable people to build anonymous products, in particular a focus on cryptocurrency and dark finance. Now I'm working on a project which is, so I'm helping to develop NIM, but I'm also working on I'm working on anonymization of cryptocurrencies and products to do that, and also and that's kind of like my initial goal, is how to anonymize cryptocurrencies, but the same technology that I'm building out will be kind of like a platform or like a library that we can use to build other products, like exchanges, decentralized exchanges, marketplaces, and then also like a generalized platform for like issuing anonymized smart contracts and different financial instruments.
Are you planning on integrating Bitcoin in those projects?
Yeah, all of the cryptocurrencies.
Do you have like a name for any of them outside of NIM? Or
no, it's
is
not
that sort of like
public
still
yet.
being... And I also wanted to ask about the Hacker Academy that you've been running in Spain. Can you sort of tell me where you are with that? I guess these are probably the projects you're working on right now. At the Academy, but can you tell me?
There's a Lightning Hack Day that's happening in April in the Academy. The Academy in Barcelona is the first academy that we're making. Like, the plan is in the future to have more academies, and the Academy is one part of like a bigger thing, which is like the incubator or the Hack Lab. So we want to start to bring in projects and interesting projects and kind of nurture these projects and develop them into entities or products, and have some of these products be profitable so we can bring in income and we can invest it into like other products. And the academy is like one part where we want to kind of be able to do training for people, like maybe some classes about cryptocurrency, but then also like more intensive trainings like for people that either for like our organization or for the people that are working on different projects. There's like a more commercial aspect, and then there's like a more non-commercial aspect.
I wanted to ask too about one thing I've heard. I know you've worked with Vitalik in the past, or at least collaborated with him. He was the original guy who covered your release of Dark Wallet for Bitcoin Magazine. And I know when the Ethereum fundraising sort of started to pop off, I think you were in Syria at the time. But I was just curious about your thoughts on Vitalik. You mentioned that a little bit earlier. I've heard a lot of people talk about when people lose their way, about a good thing to do, sort of like all these disagreements that happen in the community. A good thing to do is sort of to remind them why they got involved and to sort of be able to channel that. So I was curious if you could remind Vitalik of anything back from, I guess, the pre-Ethereum days. What do you think you would remind him of?
That he was in our hack lab and we were feeding him, and not just him, but other developers, and offering a space for people to come and to work on projects and training people. And therefore he has a duty or responsibility to pay it forwards to the next generation of developers.
Yeah, this whole conversation we've been hitting on narrative. You've sort of talked about what you think is wrong, or just the fact that the Bitcoin community doesn't really have a cohesive narrative right now. What do you think? What's your vision of Bitcoin's narrative if it is to be successful?
The legacy of civilization that we live in is a state-based civilization. It's civilization which is based off of hierarchical system of control, specialization of labor, which lead to all the modern problems we have with like alienation and domination and authority. And so, we want to create a different kind of society, one which is free, in which people have liberty, in which the natural wealth of people's creative energies is used effectively, is nurtured and developed. And this emerging field of cryptography offer us a power, the power that we can use, in particular inside of the economic sphere, by building out financial networks, using the tactic of counter economics to create markets and financial instruments, which we can use as a tool to subvert state power and state control, and create spaces for where marginalized communities or actors can operate outside of state control. I don't know how well I answered that for you, but I'm always interested to improve.
So I had a question about Dark Wallet specifically. Mm-hmm. In the article that Aaron Van Weerdum just put out about Dark Wallet, he pointed out that it's been alleged and unverified about whether or not the Islamic State used Dark Wallet for fundraising. I mean, I'm sure you've heard about people talking about this. I was curious about what your thoughts were on that, even if you could verify it or unverify it.
They didn't say they used Bitcoin for fundraising. They didn't say they used Dark Wallet for fundraising. They said that they said Bitcoin is a great tool for fundraising, and they do use Bitcoin. But they did say that they were looking forward to the release of Dark Wallet, and it would be like a great tool, and that they ask Allah to hasten its usage. And you asked me what I'm thinking about that. I was like, there was three major events that year, which was the first was that the European Central Bank released a report about the top 5 key money laundering threats, and dark wallet was one of those key threats, which is pretty fucking cool. I don't know what's more cool than having a European Central Bank put you in their report about key money laundering threat. The second thing was that news about ISIS saying, dark wallet is going to be great. We want it to happen. And then the third thing was that I think a week or two after the Islamic State report, there was a high-level meeting in the US government with members of generals of the military, heads of government and heads of cryptocurrency industry. And they were talking about that report from ISIS. And they were talking about how to prevent it being used by terrorists. So that was a reaction to that ISIS report. So, that was pretty cool.
Are you planning on releasing a newer version of Dark Wallet?
Well, I guess I kind of touched on that when I talked about anonymizing cryptocurrencies. But the thing is a lot of people are going, oh, when is Dark Wallet coming out? I'm not going to release a shitty product with CoinJoin. I'm just not. CoinJoin is broken completely. So, but I will develop something that's good, that's better.
It sounds to me like a lot of times you're very spiritually conscious, and you've also spent a lot of time learning about religion. I imagine at the very least just to sort of understand the nuances in Syria when you were there. And I was curious, a lot of people do compare Bitcoin to a religion in some ways. I have my own thoughts about that, but I was curious about how you feel about Bitcoin being compared to a religion, and whether or not that's a good fit or there are limitations to it.
I guess we can say a cult is a form of a religion, but where they were just in the cult because when we talk about religion, religion's a deep thing. It's very personal to a lot of people, and I don't want to insult any Christians or Muslims or people who are very, or Buddhists or any of these people that are very in touch, or they had some kind of deep experience in their life, and cryptocurrency is quite lacking in comparison, to be honest. Maybe in some point, maybe we can say it has an ideology, but I wouldn't say it's by itself an ideology. But it is important that we have some kind of philosophy, we have some kind of belief system there, and that's kind of what we've been talking about by narrative. But I'd compare it more to a cult than a religion. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that sounds more accurate to me, at least. Just given the fact that I think it's sort of, a movement, but susceptible to the same issues which we've talked about, which to me it seems like religion in some form seems to sort of protect against.
Yeah, but religions also get corrupted as well,
sure,
as we see today. And it's kind of in this globalist, materialist age, religion's kind of receded into this shell of its former self. And to be honest, a lot of the religions, they come from an older time, and we live in a different era. So there need to be this kind of reformation or transformation or evolution, and maybe we need to develop into something new. In fact, Öcalan's ideas is basically like a religion. He talks a lot about nature and spirituality and politics. I don't really draw the line between ideology and religion. I think they're quite similar. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, some of the strongest ideologies during their peak were religions, like communism in Russia.
Yeah, Marx basically was. I don't know if it's I've had this discussion with someone before, where they said Marx was not a prophet, but he was kind of like a materialist prophet.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Satoshi's earliest writings about Bitcoin indicate that he saw Bitcoin as sort of like a political tool, mainly against the use of the current economic financial systems, central banks most of all. Do you see Bitcoin as a political tool?
Yes.
Well, I guess the reason why I asked is because technology, some people argue that technology in itself is not political. And I've heard people say this about Bitcoin, that Bitcoin by itself is not political.
What's neutral about
an
autonomous killer drone? It seems like it's made for a purpose.
I think there's confusion when it comes to the word politics, because sometimes people use it as a sort of identity kind of thing.
Democrat and Republicans.
Yeah. And I think that's a very different kind of politics than what we're talking about with Bitcoin. But I think that's people saying that Bitcoin's inherently apolitical. I think that it's a reaction to that. But I guess I was curious to hear your thoughts about Bitcoin as a political instrument.
Well, we can actually develop this concept further, and we can actually maybe say that both people are right, or both people are like incomplete in the truth, which is Ted Kaczynski in the anti-tech revolution. He kind of say that technology have this kind of innate trajectory contained within it, and it's kind of got its destiny. It's like destined to be like a tool of oppression. So what we say, and this is what Lewis Mumford say, and also Öcalan, is that the real thing is the state civilization, and the technology is shaped by different ideological forces in society, and that technology as we know it and the technology that we used is being kind of co-opted or being shaped by state civilization. And that's why we're intimately familiar with the domination that is kind of enabled by technology, which is kind of represented at its apex by the pyramids, which is these gigantic like monolithic structure that were built by slaves. But then at the same time, it's like, okay, technology is influenced by politics, by different ideologies and competing philosophies, vying for power, and they continually like develop new technologies, or they invest their energies to like birth or advanced technology. But then at the same time, like maybe the technology as a force itself is not got any kind of trajectory. It's like maybe just like it's this thing that's like guided by these different forces.
Yeah, there's like a Greek word for that, which is, I think it's not mechanism, but it's machina or something like that.
Yeah, because the alternative is if technology does have a teleological force inside of it, then there's really no hope for us. We're kind of like going to lose to the AI.
Yeah, that's like the ultimate idea. In some ways, I think that, this is when people talk about how cryptocurrency being used is a sociological movement. The effort to sort of use technology to change society, I think that does come down to like what a lot of people who invest in Bitcoin are believing, whether they choose to or not. But there's obviously more complexities in how that actually works, because there's sociological influence on Bitcoin too. Anyway, those are all my questions. Thanks a lot for taking the time, man.
No worries. Nice to talk with you. Thanks a lot for your questions. Maybe it was like useful in some way.
Bye. The Bitcoin Magazine podcast is a BTC Media produced podcast on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network. You can find us on Twitter at Bitcoin Magazine, and you can find out about other engaging shows we produce by subscribing to our feed on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.